All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for viewing again. Today we have Tony Clubb with Club One Investigations. There's some new laws, some SB something or other that he'll touch on. Workplace violence. I think it's an important thing for people to be aware of, depending on the size of the company and stuff like that. But I met Tony originally through the chamber, and then turns out he's a master in kung fu. He's a pretty badass guy. So I've been training and trained a few times with Tony. Really appreciate it. Have a lot of fun there. So, if you want to just take a second, tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. Always look forward to coming in and speaking with people. And owner of Club One Investigations. I come from a law enforcement background. I worked for over 24 years with Riverside County Probation. During that time, I got to do a lot of cool stuff, multiple task force assignments, canine handler, firearms instructor, defensive tactics instructor. And when I got ready to retire, kind of was looking for what was the next step. I was way too young to sit at home and do nothing. And I always liked doing investigations. So talked to a couple buddies that were ahead of me that retired, opened their own businesses. They kind of explained the kind of the premise. One of them was trying to run the world through his company that he started and in private investigations, and the other one was more of a just an individual person like me just looking to supplement their retirement. And so it sounded like something I'd really enjoy, so I started my own business. The day after I retired, my Club One Investigations opened up for business, and it's been an interesting journey, just all the different things that I didn't even realize were out there to do. Everything from surveillance and your typical PI work and following people around, but people contacting me to do bug sweeps on cars.
That's a real thing.
That's a real thing. Matter of fact, the first one that I did was funny. It was someone that I knew through work who had a friend that was going through a marital situation, figured they were being tracked. And at the time, I said, hey, I don't really have any equipment or anything like that for this. I said, but I can search it like I would if I was looking for drugs in a car. And they're like, sure, come on out. So did it. Of course, nobody ever thinks you're going to find anything. And within, I think, 5 minutes, I found it. Matter of fact, I met them in the parking lot where they had parked their car. I said, okay, I will text you when I'm done or if I find something. And I texted them when they got back to their desk and said, hey, I've got it.
Time to walk in.
Yeah, enough time to walk back and get it. So things like that. Also worked a little bit in the security side, doing some events, kind of some executive protection type stuff. So that was interesting. And then I went to a conference, private investigators conference for California private investigators. And when I did that, I met a person that had developed an active shooter program. And because of my background with law enforcement, when I retired, I had several people approach me and say, hey, would you come into our business and do active shooter training? I said, well, I don't really have any civilian side. I know how law enforcement would respond and certain things, but that's definitely not how you want your employees to respond.
Right. Well, less proactive approach.
Yeah, you want to think about your alternates than going out and neutralizing the threat. So when I met this gentleman, Michael Julian, he developed the Alive program, and we hit it off. He's local. He's operates his business out of Marietta. So he had a class for instructors coming up, and it was the following month. So he had also wrote a book on Amazon, and I picked up his book. Matter of fact, I think I picked it up at the conference, and I think I spent most of the conference reading the book. Nice. Because as people would come up and talk, a lot of them were telling war stories and stuff like that. So I just decided I was going to read the book. And once I started reading the book, I couldn't put it down. So a couple of days, I think by the time the conference was over, I was done with the book, and I was kind of sold on his philosophy and his approach to surviving an active shooter incident, and took the course. So then I started teaching active shooter survival for him, and I would work for him when he couldn't make it to a presentation, or I would also do it through my own business. So we kind of developed this relationship early on, working together, and then that kind of led me to where we're at now, which is SB 553 in California. It's a workplace violence prevention law that went into place.
One second, before you get into that, I got to ask, do you remember the name of the book?
Uh, I think it's
Maybe
10 Minutes to Live.
10 minutes.
But let me double check because I'd hate to misquote.
Yeah.
Minutes to Live. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. Sorry. So, okay. Then that's your experience is phenomenal. I can see where it's a perfect fit for you. And just from a business standpoint, it's killer that you're able to, um, go through your years, get the retirement, and have that income while you're starting a venture. That's a lot of benefit to that. I imagine having that there. So, and part of what we really want to talk about today is that law, that SB law.
Yes.
What was it? It's SB 553?
It's SB 553,
Okay.
Senate Bill 553, and it was signed into law, I want to say, in early October. There was some revisions throughout, and then the final bill was signed, and it put a date for the big portion of it that business owners need to comply with was July 1st.
Yeah, Monday.
Yes. Yeah, this week. So the compliance date has come and gone, but I think personally, when you look at everything that's required for businesses that they have to put in place, that it's as long as you're working on it, I think you're probably going to be pretty good. But you need to, if you haven't gotten it in place yet, you need to look at it and get it in place because it's not something that you're going to be able to just add a policy. I'm just going to show you a video. The legislation
in the handbook. What's we talked about it a little earlier, but what are the size requirements again for the types of businesses that really need to make sure they're doing it?
Yeah, it's pretty much if you have 10 or more employees. And then we deal a lot with people that are right on that fringe where it's you may have more than 10 employees. And it says if you have more than 10 employees, but they're working at a location of their choosing, basically you're working virtually, you're working from home, then it doesn't apply. But we're always getting approached by people that right on that cusp. So I have more than 10, but maybe 4 of them are working, off site at a location of their choosing, but we do require them to come into the office periodically. And we always say, well, if better to my favorite saying, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So it's good information. Not only is it about workplace violence, but it also talks about situational awareness when we do our training. So you're incorporating in skills that you can apply elsewhere, not just the work site.
Yeah, that saying's one of my favorite too. Whenever I talk to somebody about CCW, that's my comment.
That's usually
I don't ever want to even touch it, but
if I need to, I got it.
So that's awesome. So, what are some of the pieces that have to go into place that go with this, and some of the services that you guys offer that help with that stuff, so that people have an understanding of what work goes into it and what they can do themselves or what they might need an expert to do?
So when we first approached it, when Michael Julian approached me and asked me to work with his company Alive and put together a package, we took the approach that we wanted to develop a package that would be like a do-it-yourself package. So anybody with some elbow grease can pick up this package and they can follow the instructions and fill out the forms and get the training done, and they can do it all themselves. Pretty reasonable, but time is money. And sometimes people run into, I don't have time. I'm running a business and now I have to do this.
Yeah.
So can I pay someone a little bit of money and they'll come in and do it? And so we offer, not only do we offer the package, but we also offer to do any portion of it or all of it for the client. So the first thing that when we're doing it, we start off with is we do the site inspection, which is they call them security assessments, but in this legislation, they're more like an inspection. They aren't as in depth as a security assessment. You're not looking at every aspect of security. You're kind of focused on preventing workplace violence. What can you do to make your workspace safer for your employees?
No sharp pencils and
at times. You may need a sharp pencil.
What are some of the things that they want to make sure that are either locked up or not available, or what does that kind of mean as far as like a functional day-to-day?
When we do it, the biggest issue that we come across is access control. So a lot of businesses that don't need to have their doors open to the public have them open to the public. Um, we have some people that do have sales, but primarily their function is administrative. So we're always recommending, hey, put a buzzer on the door.
So like our door, I mean, there's only two people in our office, but it's always closed, but it's never locked.
Yeah,
Are you saying it should be locked?
yeah,
It wouldn't hurt, right?
it wouldn't hurt.
We
And people put up a bell.
we have a ring camera, so I mean,
Yeah,
they can
and
buzz
see, it's funny when you get stuff like that in place. I was at one a site inspection up in Northern California last week. They had the ring camera, and they have the little monitor at the person's desk. I rang the ring, and they didn't know I was coming. I rang the ring doorbell, and the first thing they did was open the door.
Just open it.
And they're like, "Can we help you?" I'm like, "Well, we
Why don't
already
you
have
ask
a
that through
problem."
your camera? Like you could literally do that through the camera.
Exactly.
Uh,
And that's one of the things that we point out certain hazards, or it may be a procedure like that. There was another location up north that we were looking at. There was a door, but it was an old building. So it had no ring camera, it had no peephole, nothing. So all you had to do to find out who was on the other side of the door is open the door. But that immediately opens your business to a problem potentially. Yeah. So just little things like that. And when we look at camera coverage, we recommend having cameras up because when you're looking at workplace violence, I forgot to throw in the other aspect. Kind of one of the things that helped me jump from all the stuff that I've done over to workplace violence. It's more of an HR aspect. When I was with my department, assigned to our HR division. So I oversaw backgrounds, internal investigations, training, payroll, labor negotiations, all that type of stuff. So I kind of had an idea of how the HR world works, at least from my organization standpoint. And so that helped me jump over to this project, which primarily who we're dealing with right now are HR professionals. They're the people that know about the law. They're the people that have some understanding of the things that need to be put in place, but they may not understand all of it. Like you asked, sometimes what do we get called in? A lot of people want us to do the security inspection because even though we have a template for them to use, they just don't feel comfortable. It's outside their lane, their normal lane. And so when you ask someone who works in HR to now go around and point out potential hazards at the work site, which can be, we talked about the access control. It can be plants and vegetation blocking, making it to where someone, bad lighting in the parking lot. That's another big one. Not this time of year, but as we get into those winter months where it gets darker and people are leaving the office. So we kind of, when we approach our inspection, we start from the outside, the perimeter, as if I'm an employee arriving at work. And then we work through all the layers and then we get into the work location and we're evaluating, do you have, one of the things is, do you have a panic room, safe room? So do you have somewhere where people can shelter in place if they have to?
would that room have like a fire, like a hardened door and like not a panic room, like I don't picture like like the movies where a
Yeah.
steel door slam shut or anything, but something that somebody can't just easily kick open and
Yeah, you want a secure room that you can lock that can't be unlocked easily from the outside, and you want it ideally solid door. You don't want to have windows to where people can
this
see
should
out.
be our panic room.
This could be your
This
panic room.
window's covered by a half-inch piece of plywood, so
There you
we're
go.
not going out through it either. But
But someone, yeah, you want to just fortify it so in the event that you had to, you have a place to go.
yeah.
And so with this, the first component is you do that inspection. You identify any areas in your organization, in your site, and that's another part with the law. Each site has to have its own plan because the law is specific that your workplace violence prevention plan has to be specific to your site. And we know that there may be commonalities in sites, but they may not be exactly the same. So you can't just have that blanket, oh, this is my company's workplace violence prevention plan. We have 10 locations and it's the same plan for all of them. Has to be specific.
Yeah.
So you've got that. You've identified your hazards. Now you work on developing your plan. So you put your plan together, meeting the criteria, and then you have to train your employees on
I
it.
imagine it's probably even similar to like your fire plan. Like you're going to run to this. Here's the room you're going to run to, and
Yes.
here's the button you push on the way by, or whatever it might be.
It's specific on the things that you have to train your staff. Like one of the things is you have to, and it's funny because the language they use in legislation, effective training. You have to provide them effective training in how to shelter in place and how to evacuate. Well, there's no definition of what's effective. I always joke with
Yeah,
the
you can't really
clients.
test that effectiveness without like
Yeah,
having a threat. I mean, like,
that's what we say. We say, well, we'll find out when,
yeah,
if and when something happens, if it was effective
right.
based on what ultimately happens. So
Gotta
you
definitely get
develop
that
your
work. Yeah.
plan. You've got your inspections, you develop your plan, and now you train your staff. And you have to train them on the plan. You have to train them about what is workplace violence, and legislation clearly outlines their interpretations, act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in the workplace. It's that simple.
When documenting all of that too, right? Like,
Oh yeah, every incident has to be documented in a violent incident log. So you're going to look at it, and it's going to run down different things. And in the violent incident log is one document, and then you also have to have an investigation. The difference is your investigation is going to have details, including who, like personally identifying information. It was Tony Clubb, and he threatened Austin. And then your violent incident log, which your employees are entitled to, has no personally identifying information. So when you talk about who did what, it may be more like, oh, the sales associate, no name, no identifying information, had a type 1 incident, which your perpetrator in the type 1 is going to be somebody that has no reason to be on site. It's going to be more like,
so the sales associate had somebody wandering that wasn't supposed to be there.
yeah, could be a cashier, and a type 1 would be someone coming in to rob the place.
Yeah.
So, because typically what people think about when they think about workplace violence is two employees or a former employee coming back, and that's just one of four
Literally
categories.
going postal.
Yeah.
But no.
And so once you do all that, so every time you have an incident, you have to document it, investigate it, and then you have to conduct another site inspection after an incident to make sure that there's not something that you missed in your first one or something that you need to modify. Then, if you modify something to come up with a new procedure, then you have to train your staff. Now, every year you have to provide this training to your staff. And every year you have to evaluate your whole program to train your staff. And or if you make any modifications, and then you're going to retrain your staff. So it can be cumbersome, but the one thing we have seen is that a lot of the organizations, the people just aren't informed of what to do or what the company would like them to do in the event of emergencies. Or they have, oh, yeah, we have drills, but we usually just talk through them. Well, that's great in theory, but you need to kind of walk and know how you're going to get out. And another thing that we see is we like to, in bigger organizations, maps on the
Yeah.
exit doors. Where do I go? How do I get out of here? And where do I rally?
Well, that's what I pictured. Like a fire, you got a fire map. The exits this way through the fire.
Yep.
Here's the arrows for where to run. So something similar. And I think it's you mentioned. I think I'm actually cutting you off because you mentioned most people think it's the workplace, people against employees, ex-employees against
Yeah.
employees, but it could be a lot of things. I mean, robbing it or
Oh, yeah.
homeless, and obviously a big issue in Riverside is the homelessness. And one of the things that there's grants for and there's activity around is fortifying essentially some of
Yes.
those exterior things that you talked about, the lighting, the bushes, the ring cameras, locking your doors. Unfortunately, those are good practices regardless
Mhm.
now, just with the way it is out there, right? So it's interesting how that is more relevant even than just the violence aspect, right? Because even just
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
wandering in and defecating in the lobby, like that wouldn't happen if you had your door locked,
Yeah,
right? And I'm not saying
exactly.
it happens a lot, but it happens, right?
It does happen. And, I've talked to people in all kinds of businesses that it's a real issue for them, whether it's people setting up encampments around their location, and then you start getting traffic, and then all of a sudden they start notice someone breaking into their yard and stealing equipment or attempting to steal equipment. Or you, like you said, you have the people that are just, they need a place to. We talked about one that happened here where they just wanted to use the restroom. And then you have the ones that'll sleep in that's a nice area. It's covered. It's away from the cold or the heat. It's protected, and they feel safe. And then They may not have all their wits about them when you show up to work the next day and you ask them to leave, and then it can easily escalate into a situation.
Yeah, that's the hard part. I mean, a lot of them are just looking for comfort initially, right? But unfortunately, there's either instability through drugs or mental issues that can um, lead to violence, even though that might not be their intention or their nature, right? But like
Yeah.
that's crush loose, right? So some stuff could happen. Um, so okay, so starting it was July 1st.
Yes.
People with companies where more than 10 employees may be congregating at one time, right? So even if they're remote, if they might come in once a week for a group meeting, like the company meeting or whatever,
Yeah.
they need to work on this. You guys have the program, the package kind of available. It's for people that want to do it themselves. Do you want to mention where they can find that, or is that
Sure.
something? Yeah.
That's the organization that I'm working with is Alive, Active Shooter Survival, but now we've also jumped into that workplace violence. But there is a site you can go to. You can just Google Alive. It's an acronym, stands for assess your situation. If you can, leave. And we're talking about active shooter response.
Okay.
If you can't leave, you're going to need to impede their approach to you, create time and distance. If you can't leave, you can't impede, and there's going to be a confrontation. We talk about the use of violence. We don't like the kind of everything's based off the run, hide, fight platform, but we like to see it more empowering. Like you're making decisions on what's going to happen, so you're going to choose to use violence to confront this person because ultimately it comes down to you going home or you not going home. And then our last component of our program is we talk about when would it be safe if you've barricaded yourself and put yourself in a safe place? When is it okay to expose your location?
Uh,
Is it ever safe to do that? Everybody's got their cell phones all the time. Could you just call law enforcement and say, hey, this is who I am. This is where I am. Is it safe for me to come out of the room?
yeah.
More than likely, they'll say, we'll send someone to come and get you. Because what a lot of people don't realize in active shooter situations, statistically, you can read about that in the book 10 Minutes to Live that Michael Julian wrote. But after looking at a 20-year study done by the FBI, and they looked at all these situations that had happened over 20 years, and when they looked at them, 69% of them were over in 5 minutes or less.
Mm.
And when you move that up to the 10-minute mark, now well into the 90 percentile of the incidents are done. Now, this is not from the time the scene is cleared and made safe. This is from the time the shooter starts shooting until they stop shooting for whatever reason. They could take their own life. They could, get into a shootout with law enforcement, or what we've seen a little bit more frequently now is putting their guns down and just trying to blend into the crowd and getting away.
Oh,
So there's a couple different things that happen. We always say get law enforcement on scene as quick as possible because one of those three things is going to happen. And if they're doing one of those three things, the big thing is they're not shooting at you.
yeah.
So we always emphasize that's one of our first things is get that call out to law enforcement. But on the other side, and we incorporated a lot of this into our workplace violence prevention plan that is in our package, we looked at how can you identify someone that may be moving in that direction through their behavior, through their um, verbal cues, through certain things that may be happening in their personal life or work life or both, and how can you prevent that from how can you basically help them so they don't do something, they don't get to that point. And so we emphasize that a lot in
That's
both the active shooter program and also workplace violence.
yeah. I mean, they're really married at the hip. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, um, if you're doing all the things that SB 553 is dictating, then you're preparing for that situation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the many potential workplace violence situations, right? And
Yep.
um, statistically, I could be wrong, but I feel like it's not a huge percentage of violent crime, is it? The workplace violence kind of stuff, or the bigger?
Um,
Well, okay, let me rephrase that question.
I can give you
The
some
employee to
stats.
employee type
Yeah.
isn't right, but yeah, give me some stats.
So, in looking at building our program, we were looking at stats that were put together by various organizations, and there's over 2 million reported workplace violence incidents every year in the United States.
Wow.
So, we know that the vast majority of them, probably well in 90% of them, aren't reported the first time around. or some just are never reported because people just don't feel safe. And so that's law also
Now
is
that's
clear.
threats. That's threats and
Yeah. And acts of
mild
violence. Yeah.
violence, and then
Up to severe
up
violence.
to severe violence.
So in looking at that, just those reported incidents on average cost businesses between 250 and 330 billion dollars every year. Billion.
Dang. So that's
A lot.
yeah. I was trying to do the math in my head. If there's 2 million reports and 2 billion claims, that's crazy.
Yeah. So it gives you an idea of the fiscal impact. Plus, the studies have all shown that staff are more effective, more productive when they're in an environment where they feel both psychologically and physically safe. And I think as employers, we have a responsibility to provide that to our staff.
Yeah.
So those are just a couple of the stats. There's a million stats. I mean, you can look at stats all the time that tweak things one way or another. An interesting stat that kind of rolls along with that is that over 60% of the businesses felt that an active shooter or active assailant situation was one of their top threats, but just that they were nervous about it, and they viewed that as a not a high probability, just that hey, this is a big concern because they want to
Well,
make
yeah,
sure.
if it happened, I mean,
Yeah,
percentage wise, it's probably not a big concern, but if it does happen,
yeah,
it's the worst one,
yeah.
right? So
You go
that
from
makes
0
sense.
to 100,
Right, yeah.
and in looking at that, when they followed up with a question that said, "Well, how many feel that you have effectively prepared for that?" Almost 80% of them said no. And then you said, well, why not? Followed up with another question because over 60% of them hadn't even done anything to address it. So we call it the ostrich syndrome. If I don't see it, I stick my head in the ground, it's not there, but it is there.
Yeah, yeah.
And better to have it, not need it, than
Yeah.
need it, not have it. So,
It's funny, it worked out great. Tony and I texted earlier this week and planned to meet at our chamber's business action meeting
yep.
this morning, and we were the only two in the parking lot because the 4th of July is tomorrow, right? So
Yes,
they were having a
yes.
meeting, but we were able to grab breakfast, squeeze in the podcast, which I appreciate. I
Hey,
think
no
that
problem.
people really need to be mindful of this. I think when I first kind of heard about it, I was a little bit skeptical, just as another layer of bureaucracy and stuff like that. But I can see after talking to you a couple times, like I really see where one, it doesn't seem like it's going to be as expensive or burdensome as I imagined. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still
It's still
there's
there.
still elements to it, but it's more in the front, right? And then once it's in place, it could be really something that could really help your company. Like you said, it need it and have it, not need it, not have it. I mean, if one of the companies you work with has a situation and people are saved because of it, it's a good investment.
Yeah,
I mean, to put
exactly.
it in black and white terms, it's a smart investment for the company. So thanks for coming by.
No problem.
There's
And to add on to that, when I started looking at it, I was in the same boat, and I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go, California with this another thing that we put in place. And now that I've actually gone out and done, you know, dozens of site inspections and talked with business owners and employees, I see that this is actually helping with awareness. It's helping prepare people. And like I said, the things that we're teaching staff here they can take out into the real world. Situational awareness is the big one. So just
yeah,
being
that's
aware of what's
huge.
going
I
on.
wish people would just look around more.
Put the phone down and look
Put the
around.
phone down, look around, and unfortunately, things are getting um, less stable as we move forward in the world. So
Yes, interesting times.
yeah. So again, thanks for coming.
No problem. Thank you
Appreciate
for
you.
having me.
Yep.